So the next one is batch Apex. Now batch programming. So basically, whenever we are writing the batch Apex, maximum of 50 million records we can process. We can process the 50 million records. That means these 50 million records we cannot process in the single batch. We have to divide the huge, whatever the records are there. There is a very huge records. In one transaction, we cannot process the 50 million records, right? So if I wanted to process the 50 million records, I have to divide those records into the multiple batches or various batches. I have to divide it. Once I divide into the various batches, then we can process piece by piece. Now, to perform the long running operation anywhere, if you want to perform a very long, usually the batch gets executed for the huge records. In case if you want to perform a long run operation, batch class is always inside, it should be always inside the Apex queue. That means you have to create a queue that basically I have so many records are there in there is so many records are available within this. Right? So this is assume that this is a container. In this container, I have so many records are there. So many records are there. Now this, assume that this is a 50 million records. I cannot process the 50 million records, right? If I wanted to lift this container, I cannot lift this container because it has a huge items in it, right? So what we will do, we will create a temporary. We will create a temporary allocation or a temporary box, and we will move this out of 50 million, maybe 10 million records we might push into the 10 million records we might push into the one container. Another container is a 5 million records, right? Another container is a 2 million records. Like that, we will split it. So once we split this, then we can use or I can lift this container because the quantity is less. When the quantity is more, it's a heavy container. Nobody can lift it. Now, if I wanted to move this package from one place to another place, first shift that heavy container into the smaller chunks. Divide that into the smaller chunks and process the smaller. That means process the smaller containers, right? So this way is easier rather than loading the heavy one. One more problem is if you lift the heavy container, what will happen? It might affect you also. That means you might not be able to lift another container. Maybe some issue. Similarly, in the Apex also, in the Salesforce also, when we try to process the 50 million records in a single transaction, system performance will go down. System performance, it will go down, and after some time it might break it or it might not able to process none of the records. So that's the reason, divide it, make it a simple, and then process those transactions. Right? Now let's see here. Now let's say, for example, I have a database.com. In this database.com, we have an account table. In the account table, there are 20 million records are there. 20 million records are there. Now we wanted to update or we wanted to modify these records in some data I wanted to update, maybe account rating or account industry I wanted to update. If I wanted to update the account industry and the rating for the 20 million records, what will happen? Now it's a heavy load, right? Now we have to divide this heavy load into the smaller chunks. Now, by using what we can do it, we can use the database.batchable interface. We have a batchable interface. Using this batchable interface, we can process these records will be split by splits. Like a batchable interface has a limit of 50 million records. It has a limit of 50 million records. And whenever we are implementing the batch class, 3 methods are mandatory. The first one is a start method, second one is an execute method, and the third one is a finish method. Batch class is having a 3 type. One is a start method, execute method, finish method, right? So these 3 methods are very important because we are using here the interface. Whenever we are inheriting the interface, or whenever we are using the interface, this interface expects that in your class, you should have a start method, execute method, and the finish method. Now, in the start method, we have to write a SOQL query in order to pull the data from the database. Now, this SOQL query, how we will write it? By using the database dot get query locator. By using the database dot get query locator, because by using the get query locator, I can retrieve the 50 million records. Get query locator, I can retrieve the 50 million records. Right. So if it is a normal DML operation, how many records can we retrieve it? If it is a normal DML operation, how many we can retrieve it?
50,000.
50,000, right? So 50,000 is not enough and we have a too much data here. So that's the reason we have to use the database.query locator. Asynchronous always goes with the database. It does not go with the DML. One of the reason is limit, right? So by using this database.getQuery locator, I can retrieve the data from the database.com. The limit is 50 million records. Now I'll retrieve it and will store it into the one temporary buffer memory. This is the actual table. Retrieve that, store it into the temporary buffer memory. So how it is going to store? Basically, whatever the batch that I have, batch that is trying to process the batch information, will divide this 20 millions into the multiple. That means I have a batch 1, batch 2, batch 3, batch 4, batch 5, batch 6. Let's assume that I'll take a less number here. Let's assume that I have a 50 records, right? These 50 records, what I want is I wanted to divide into the temporary buffer. That means how can I do it? I can do it 50 and process the batch. While executing the batch, I'll specify the number. This number is going to tell that how many temporary buffer memories do you wanted to create it. So it says that 5. So when it says 5, that means 50 by 5. So 10 records in the batch 1, another 10 records in the second batch, another 10 records in batch 3, another 10 records in batch 4, another 10 records in batch 6, right? So total 6 batches it is going to divide it and it is going to process. That means during the runtime, the developer has to specify that how many buffer memories do you want to create it. It's all decided by during the runtime. Now during the runtime, we will explain it how many batches do you want to divide it based on the number of records. Based on the number of records, it always divides. Like if I have a 20 million, if I say that 200, so if 2 million by 200, so whatever the batches it is going to divide it, system is going to decide it how many temporary batches we needed. So it will create the batch and some of the records will be stored here, some of the records will be stored here. Like this, it will be stored into each buffer. Now, once it is stored the information in the database.query locator, in start method, what we have to do, we have to write the SOQL query and then create a temporary buffer memory, how we are going to store this data. And then it returns the data. It returns which batch do I need to process it. Which batch do I need to process? Like right now, it is divided into the multiple temporary buffer memory. Now, which batch do we need to process? First, it will go to the batch 1. Right? Batch 1 size is 1 to 2000 and the default size is 200. Default size is 200. That means you can specify during the runtime what is the batch size. Do you want to create only one batch or do you want to create a maximum of 2000? Or default size is, if you do not specify anything, default it will create a 200. Default it will create a 200. Now, first it will execute the database.query locator and then it will process, it will send it to the execute batch using some return type. That means start method will return the batch, whatever the batch size is there. So if it is a first batch, if we are processing it, first batch it is going to send it to the execute method. Now execute method will execute the business logic. Once the business logic is executed, then it will send back to the start method. it will send back to the start method because it says that now I have completed the batch one. Now I have completed the batch one. Now, is there any new batches that I need to process? Now it will send it to the start method. Start method will give the batch two. Now batch 2 will be sent to the execute method. Now it will complete the batch 2 and again it will send it to the start method till the batch 6 is completed, till all the records are processed. Once it says that okay, we are done with executing all the temporary buffer memory, whatever is their batches, all the batches are completed. Then finally it will send the information to the finish method saying that we have completed. So that means this cycle is goes on. The cycle is goes on till it completes all the record processing it. Take a notes of it. Let me know once it is completed. None? Okay. Now, if we want to implement a batch class, for example, I wanted to implement a batch class, then there are 4 steps that we have to complete. The step 1 is we need to create a batch with the access modifier that is called global. Batch class always starts with a global access modifier, right? And the interface we have to use is database.batchable. So the syntax will be global class name, right? So whenever I create a Apex class, it's a normal way to create a Apex class, but we need to use the access modifier which says global. Which says global is the access modifier, class name, and then you need to use the implements keyword, and the interface is database.batchable as object. Database.batchable as object. And then this is the class how it starts. Within this class, we need to specify the logic. What are the logic that we wanted to write? We need to specify the logic. So step 1 is create a batch class with a global access specified and implement the class with the interface called database.batchable S object. That is the step 1. And step 2 is write the interface method inside the class. That means now we have written the class. The high level class is done. Now we need to implement a method for the interface class. What are the methods that we have? We have a methods inside this. One is a start method. For the start method, return type is database.queryLocator, right? And second method is execute method. And the third one is finish method. These three methods are important: start, execute, and finish method. In the start method, we need to pass the parameter which is called as a database.batchable context. For the database.batchable interface, we have a database.batchable context reference name. This is the interface name. This is the interface name. Database.batchable context is the interface name. That is for the start method. And the execute method is a void method. And the execute method has a two parameters. One is the interface, database.batchable context, reference name, comma. We need to provide the list of the S object. Whatever this start method is there, start method is going to send the return values to the batch class, list of the S object, and whatever the parameter is there, that parameter. And the finish method will have only one parameter, the interface, which is called as a database.batchable context. So these are the main methods in the batch class. So interface, whenever we are implementing the batch class, it has to start with the global, and the interface is database.batchable S object, and it should have a start, execute, finish method. In these methods, we have a database.batchable context reference name. In the execute method, we have a database.batchable context reference name, comma, list of S object. For the finish, it's just one parameter, which is a database.batchable context reference name. Now this is the step 2. Once the step 2 is done, then we have to go with the step 3 to invoke a batch class. In order to invoke a batch class, so first we will create a batch class, right? So we need to create an object for the batch class. That means initialization in the anonymous window. Now the next one is we need to execute the batch class. How I can invoke it? Using the database.execute batch. In order to run the batch, in order to invoke the batch, we need to use the database.execute batch method. So that means the syntax is database.execute batch. You need to provide the object name. You will be creating you will be initializing the object name, right? So that object name you need to pass it, and the batch size. Batch size is, if you do not specify the batch size, by default it will take 200. If you specify it, you can specify between the 1 to 2000. And the step 4 is track the status of the batch class, where you can track it by using the wizard like this. Setup, monitor, jobs, Apex job, there you can monitor it. Or by using the programming. Programming also you can monitor the job, but the query is asynchronous Apex job is the object. So how can you run it? Select ID, comma, status, total job items, job item process, number of errors created by email from asynchronous job, where ID equal to batch job. So by using either, you can track the batch job, batch class in the Apex jobs, or else using the object which is called as a asynchronous Apex job. This you cannot see in the object manager, you can see only in the developer console, right? Objects, you can see the asynchronous Apex job. Now let's see the one scenario so that you will understand. So create a batch class to update all the account record by using all the account records, assigning the values as the below, by dividing the records to have a various batch sizes 5. So basically what is the requirement here? I need to implement a batch class on the account, right? Which is the update. We are updating the account record. And then we need to assign the values to the records by dividing the batch size into 5. That means If I have a 50, it should be divided by 5. Then that means I need to specify the batch size, second parameter in the database dot execute batch. Second parameter, I need to specify the 5. So whatever the total of records are there, it will be divided by 5. So whatever the output is there, those many batches, those many temporary batches gets created at the backend. Now let's go ahead and implement that. Developer console, file, new, Apex class. We are implementing the update account records. Update account records, account record batch. Now, when we are implementing the batch class, access modifier should be a global. And then we need to add the interface, which is called implements database dot batchable. And then we need to pass the S object. Perfect. Now, if I try to save this class, what will happen? It will give an error saying that as soon as I say implements this interface expect the start method, execute method, finish method. So in that case, I'll say here global database dot query locator, because the return type for the start method is query locator start. Then I'm going to pass the database dot batchable context, and then I can give any name p context. This is the start method, and the next one we need to have is execute method. Global for execute method void. We have to use the void because it does not return anything. Execute method, and for the execute method we have a two parameters. One is a database dot batchable context. Now for this b context comma, now whatever the return is, I'm going to get it from the start method. Those are like a S object. We don't know what is the object. So for now, I'm giving it as a S object. Now I'll give this, let's say REC is the variable name. This is the execute. And then finally, we have a one more method which is called as a global. Global is void because we are not going to return anything. Finish. For finish method, the expected parameter is only one parameter, which is a database dot batchable context. Then give any name, p context, I'm giving it. Now these are the three methods. Now, let's say if I click on a save, another error we will see. Another error we will see. The error is whatever the start method is there. Whatever the start method is there, this start method has to have a return type because it is expecting the return type of the database.query locator. Database.query locator. Now what we are going to do is I'm going to query all the records. Let's say, for example, I'm going to query. Let's save the query into the string because we are using the database.getQuery locator. String query equal to, let's say, select ID, comma name, comma rating from or industry, annual revenue. What else we have? Active checkbox is there. Underscore C from account. Simple query. I'm using a just simple query. Then we can say here database dot return database dot get query locator. Get query locator. In this query locator, we are going to pass the query. Access level, I'm not specifying any access level. We do not need any access level there. So this is the return. I'm querying the data, getting the, basically what it does, the start method, what are the database that I have, it will try to execute it and pull the data from the database and it will give it to the start method and the start method will pass it to the execute method. Right? In the execute method, now in the execute method, what we are going to do, we have a records. We have a records. Now this records, I wanted to check whether it is, are we getting any records or not? If rec dot is empty, if it is a empty, let's say instead of rec, this is a multiple records. Let's say rec list. Rec list is not empty. If it is not empty, then I'm going to process the records. The records that I'm going to process is, let's say, whatever the records that we are getting it. First, I need to convert that into the account object. Whatever the S object is there. What is the data type here? Data type is S object. Now, if you have a straightforward query, like a DML query, you can pass the account details. But here what we are using the database.get query locator. Output of the database.get query locator is a S object. Now we are getting the S object here. Now this or S object, I'll loop through the S object. Let's say for loop S object, let's say SOBJ colon records list. Whatever this records list is there, I need to loop through this. Now here, S object, whatever this S object is there, I need to convert this into the account. So first let's convert ACC record equal to S object. Now before this S object, I'm going to add for converting this into the account. So I'm converting this is the conversion. So S object converting into the account and storing into the ACC record, storing into the ACC record. Now this ACC record, whatever the record I'm storing it, I'll just update some information. Let's say ACC record dot active checkbox. We have a active checkbox equal to yes. For all the accounts, I'm updating the active checkbox is yes. And similarly, we have a industry. Industry equal to, let's say, everything I'll update it to the banking. And similarly, ACC dot this record dot, let's say, rating. All the accounts I'm just updating into the warm. Right? Once we have done, now these are the list. Once we are done with this, so what I'll do, I'll add into the one of the list. That means I need to build the list on top, list of account, ACC list equal to new list of account. New list of account. Now this ACC list, each record, whatever we are updating the each record I'm going to push it into this list. Dot add ACC record. That means first it will go to the first record. Here S object. For example, record list is assume 5 records we are receiving the here. These 5 records I am looping through this. First record, it will convert into the account and I'm updating this information and we are storing the first record into the ACC list. Where is the ACC list? I'm initializing on top of the for loop. Now second, it will take the second record. It will first convert the second record and update the information. Then I'm storing the second record into the ACC list. Similarly, third, fourth records. Similarly, I'm updating all the records. Each record I am storing into the ACC list. In this list, I'm storing into all the records. Once I'm done with storing all the records, then finally I can update it. So this is the for loop. I'll come outside of it if whatever this list is there. if this list is not empty, or if this list is greater than, size is greater than 0, whichever the one you prefer, you can use it. Let's say not empty, then what we are going to perform is we are going to perform the update. So which is database dot update. Database dot update. In this update, what we are going to do is we are going to process whatever the list is there, the list, comma, I'm saying the false, because in case if there is any error, do not go ahead and process other records. If it is any error there, just leave that error record and process other records. Perfect. So this is the execute method. Now in the finish method, usually in the finish method, what we write is if you want to execute another batch, or if you want to know what is happening with this job, if you want to get the information of the job information, then usually we will capture in the finish method. Let's say that if I wanted to capture the information of this job, what is happening, whether it is successful or not, what is the job details, where can I see this information? We have a object, file, open, object. Here we have a asynchronous apex job. Asynchronous apex job. In this asynchronous apex job, I need a ID, job type, what is the apex class, status, job ID processed or not, total job items. If there are any errors, number of errors completed, what is the method name? Let's say these are the information I wanted to get it and query. Right now, there are no records are there. Right now, no records are there. Now, what I'll do is same query, I'll place it inside the finish method. In the finish method, I can just track this information. I can just track the information. Now, this data I'll be storing into the asynchronous apex job. And let's say this is a job details. Job details equal to select ID, comma, whatever the name is there from, we have a asynchronous apex. Now, sometimes what happens is at the same time possible that multiple jobs might be running it. Now, in that case, I just wanted to get the updates of this particular job ID. Whatever this job is there, whatever this batch class is there, this batch class job, I wanted to know the status. So in that case, what we can do, where ID equal to whatever the BC context. Here we are passing the parameter which is called as a B context dot get the job ID. So for this particular job, just try to get the information. And let me print here system.debug job details. Plus, I'm just going to print this job details. So finish method, we do not write any logic. There won't be any business logic in the finish method. Finish method is just to know the tracking, or if you want to send an email, or if you want to call another batch, only that purpose we use the finish method. But we do not write anything inside the business logic is, we don't write the business logic inside the finish method. Now let's save this record. Perfect. Now we are done with creating the batch class. The batch class name is, this is the class. Now let's go ahead and invoke. The third step is invoke the batch class. For invoking the batch class, first we need to create a batch object for batch class. Now here I'll say account batch equal to new, whatever the class is there, the class name. And then once we have, this is the object name. Second step is invoke the batch job. Invoke the batch job. For invoking it, I'll say that database.execute database dot execute batch, and here the batchable is account batch, comma, the requirements is divided by 5. Divided by 5. So how many records I have is, I have it. Let's execute this one. There is a comma is missing. Now click on execute. Total 75. 75 by 5. So what is the output we are going to get it here? 75 by 5. So total 50 batches it is going to. That means every batch, the batch 1, it will process the 15 records. Batch 2, it will process the 15 records. Batch 3, it will process the 15 records. Like that, total, it is going to create a 15 batches. If you do not specify 5 here, by default, it will take 200. So in that case, what will happen? System is automatically convert the 75 by 200. That means all the records can be processed in single batch. All the records can be processed in the single batch. Now let's go ahead and execute this. Something is missing. Colon. Execute it. So let's see debug. Annual revenue is unexpected token. There is an error which we have received it. What is the error? Unexpected token, annual revenue. Line number 5, system.query annual revenue. Line number 5. Let's take off this annual revenue. Click on save. Debug, execute it. Now batch 1 is executed. Now another batch, see how many batches it is getting executed, see. So this is 1 serial batch Apex range chunker, 2, 3, in between that again a batch Apex is getting executed, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right? 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So total around 15 is gets executed. So every batch it will process. Every batch it will process the around whatever the number of 15 records are there, it is going to process it. Now let's say the debug point. Let's say here. So job details are, these are the job processed is 15. Total job items are 15 and number of errors are 0. Completed is this one. Now if I execute the query again, now the query which we have done. So this is the query, asynchronous Apex. Now if I execute it, now these are the 5 batches it got executed. 5 batches it executed, 15 is completed, 15 is completed, and here one of them is a failed. Maybe there is some issue with that. So if you want to track the field, how can you track it? So database.update, you need to store it into the save result. And after storing into the save result, if it is a successful, print the IDs. If it is a failure, get the what is the exact error that we have seen in the last class, right? So the same concept you can implement it here in the execute batch. So that's about the batch class. Now tomorrow we will see, in case if I have to send an email through the batch class, how can we send it, right? So basically the email part we will be implementing in the finish method. So we will see that tomorrow. Tomorrow is next class is on Monday. So that's about the use case. And the homework is write in a batch class to update the candidate records and send an email. So email part, forget about it, but just implement the batch class to update the candidate records. Similarly, write in a batch class to do the hard delete wherever the opportunity stage is lost. Opportunity stage is lost. That means the lost opportunity should be deleted. It should be hard deleted. That means it should not be there in the recycle bin. Implement a batch class to do the hard delete for lost opportunity records inside the object. Email part will do it tomorrow. Yeah, that's about the today's session, and we'll provide you the some trial head links